The sun never sets on the empire of football. Football's influence has kept growing throughout the world to reach a level that could well be the ultimate level of globalization. A quote by Pascal Boniface, director of the Paris-based Institute of International and Strategic Relations. In that world of globalization, the hub of all things football is the European continent, and the regulator of said continent is the Union of European Football Associations, or just UEFA, an organization that contains the biggest and most eye-catching footballing countries, clubs, players, and infrastructure on the planet. An organization that raked in over 4.3 billion euros in 22-23, and based on the fact that that figure was 5.7 billion in 2021, a year with a COVID European Championship, they are poised to make an absolute killing in 2024. And when you take into consideration the fact that 93.5% of all earnings are reportedly funneled back into the participating clubs, you realize that things are only going to ramp up in the future. UEFA is a very interesting case study, an organization that predates the European Union, but was once a very small player in a FIFA and South American dominated football landscape. Organizers of the biggest competitions on the planet that feature hundreds of clubs going toe-to-toe, often concurrently in dozens of cities, an incredibly impressive feat. Off the pitch, they are an organization so large that some believe them to be above governmental authority. Corruption, scandals, shady business, greed, and more have all been associated with them in one way or another. But, of course, even though that's what many people choose to focus on, that doesn't paint the full picture. So, in this video, we're gonna aim to do just that. Hello everyone, truly hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. The 2024 UEFA Euro was the first normal Euro in 8 years. One country, no COVID, and it's been fantastic. UEFA must be smiling ear to ear. Then it got me thinking even further. As a non-profit, what's their business model? And what has had to happen to make it so? Now, UEFA is an example of an establishment that has benefited greatly from the notion that it has inherent legacy and prestige. But in order to achieve that level of regard, you have to start somewhere. And on that note, it's impossible to understand the origins of UEFA without briefly talking about FIFA. The Federation of International Football Associations, i.e. FIFA, was established in 1904 and was done so under the mandate of becoming the global umbrella for all footballing activities across the globe. Initially, they would just organize international fixtures and events, but that turned into almost all-encompassing football governance in general. However, for the first couple of decades of their existence, they failed to grab a foothold on control of football worldwide. It was a bit of a legitimacy problem. Among others, the English and several South American countries all refused to completely fall under their authority. The English Football Association is the oldest on the planet, being founded in 1863, and CONMEBOL was founded back in 1916. On top of that, the world was in a weird position overall. Wars, social and political change, economic turmoil, countries splitting apart and coming together. Try governing that successfully. But as things progressed, the power and stature of FIFA as an organization with political power and status increased. A good example of that is that several nations joined FIFA before they joined the United Nations, highlighting its position as a powerful political stakeholder. As the sport grew even more, key figures such as Presidents João Havelange and Sepp Blatter were able to capitalize on the popularity and commercialization of football worldwide. Massive sponsorships, broadcasting deals, and much more made the FIFA World Cup a highly lucrative showcase. But in the words of Alan Tomlinson, a prolific author of several best-selling books regarding the social scientific study of sport and its biggest institutions, the culture of corruption and personal gain has long been endemic in the FIFA family. This quote comes directly from his 2014 paper, published in the Journal of Sport and Society on the governance of FIFA. Decisions to hold international tournaments in certain countries, under-the-table payments to officials, and much more have followed them throughout. To quote another article on football governance, this one by Theophilus Polopoulos, Havelange and Blatter were so influential for FIFA and football that they turned FIFA into a centralized organization where the absolute power was in the hands of the president. Anyway, that's just to give a bit of context. We don't want to go too much off topic. This is not a FIFA video. UEFA was founded 50 years after FIFA in 1954, after many larger European nations felt as though FIFA weren't serving their best interests, with those interests being growing and promoting football within Europe, which only makes sense. FIFA are a global operation, but at the same time, to this very day, almost all of FIFA's presidents have been of European descent. Jules Rimet, the longest-serving FIFA president and the man that the World Cup trophy is named after, was a Frenchman. To this day, only 2 men born outside of Europe have been presidents of FIFA, so you'd think that someone would have sooner created a continental body, seeing as there was already so much representation on an institutional level. Regardless, this is what the overall pyramid looks like in the years following when it came to the governing of football within Europe. You can slot in whatever federation you want right here, as it would remain true for every continent. The early days between FIFA and UEFA were a little confusing and probably contentious. There were people on the executive committee of both organizations, and responsibilities and legalities weren't completely clear, but with increased professionalization of the sport, the rise of television and more, European football became the golden standard. Even though FIFA is one level above UEFA, it's worth noting that the two do have similarities. For starters, they're the 2 largest footballing governing bodies in the world, and they're both non-profits headquartered in Switzerland, which, is interesting. However, they do have some fundamental differences. For example, FIFA haven't had to deal with the level of authority of geopolitical institutions in the way that UEFA has. FIFA, in a lot of ways, have gone unchecked historically. I mean, they only established an ethics committee in 2006 to keep their own governance in check, some 102 years after formation. However, UEFA are heavily regulated, which, if we're all being honest, is probably a good thing, depending on where you stand. It makes them less susceptible to several forms of corruption. Not impervious, but less susceptible. And being less susceptible is good. And being protected outright is even better. Which is why I want to pause the video quickly to talk about a different kind of threat. This video was sponsored by NordVPN. A VPN is a tool that allows you to do many things, like select a country through which you connect to the internet. I often use NordVPN to connect to the country from where the subject of the video that I'm making is from. It just makes it a lot easier to access local news reports. But most people use VPNs to access Netflix, as each country has a different catalog. At its core, a VPN is a tool that can protect your online identity, but NordVPN is much more. It is a threat protection tool that allows you to block malware, block intrusive ads, block web tracking, and protect your data. The internet is like the untamed wild. Beautiful when it wants to be. Dangerous more often than you should risk. NordVPN is here to help. If you want to get yourself protected today, you can use my custom link. It is nordvpn.com/footballiconicvpn. You can find it in the description. This will get you a 2-year membership with 4 extra months free. Plus, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Without sponsors like this, it would be hard to make these long, detailed videos, and I'm trying to get more of them out more quickly. So thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to UEFA. UEFA casts a wide net. It consists of 55 national football associations, which may surprise some to hear because the European Union only consists of 27 member states. Brexit means Brexit. But of course, there are also other states like Azerbaijan or Georgia or Turkey or Kosovo who aren't members of the EU for one reason or another. And if you think I'm gonna go into detail for why any of that is the case, that's not going to happen. As I mentioned earlier, UEFA as an organization actually predates the Treaty of Rome, which essentially established the formation of the European Economic Community in 1957. Football is much more than just a sport. It's a cash cow, it's a way to excite and control the masses, and even more so, it's a geopolitical tool. And because they are such big players, the EU has had to keep a steady eye on UEFA. Today, UEFA and the EU share a working relationship. They seem to be willing to meet each other halfway when it comes to big decisions. UEFA know that they need to comply, but the EU knows that football is unique in its place in society. But that hasn't always been the case. In the words of Borja Garcia in 2007, another sport governance specialist in the Journal of Contemporary European Research, UEFA and the European Union were historically engaged in a period of intense confrontation. During the most hostile times, the main reason for all of this was player transfers. Footballing authorities have long thought that players are not the same as regular employees and thus should not be treated as such. The biggest proof of this was the delayed professionalization of the sport, which only really happened in the late 1900s across the board, as well as FIFA's legacy international transfer system, a system that relied on nationality quotas and odd payment arrangements. In a nutshell, prior to the 1990s, clubs were only allowed a fixed number of international players in their squad, which was not that high. It kind of just discouraged people from hiring outside the country. This was said to be put in place to preserve the quality of each national team. And the transfer system was such that if a player's contract had ran out, their club would still be entitled to a fee. This was said to protect smaller clubs from spending big on training promising talent, just for bigger clubs to swoop in and take the player for free, leaving them with nothing when their contract is up. Now, on some level, the reasoning for all of this is fair, but fundamentally it also limits a player's choice of potential employment, as well as the pot that a club can tap into for potential employees, all of which go against the EU's freedom of movement and competitions policies. Something had to be done. The EU and UEFA had gotten into courtroom scuffles in the past, but nothing too major. That was until December of 1995. Jean-Marc Bosman. Bosman, a Belgian man, wasn't exactly the most well-known nor most talented football player. Nonetheless, when his contract with Belgian club RC Liège expired in 1990 and he agreed a new deal with Dunkirk in France, the deal fell through because Liège weren't happy with the proposed fee. Imagine you start your first job and they train you in the industry, but you're only signed on a one-year contract. Your contract doesn't get renewed, so you have to find another job, to live. However, the company that did not want to renew your contract refuses to let you earn a living. That's what happened here, and that's what was happening across Europe. Bosman sued Liège, UEFA, and FIFA, and won. And as a result, the nationalities quota was abolished, transfer windows were created, training fees were restricted to youth players, and contracts were suggested to only last up to 5 years. In the wake of all of this, FIFA and UEFA were not happy. The EU is just a regional organization which does not even represent all the countries in the European continent. FIFA President Sepp Blatter had this to say regarding the EU's regulation in some years later. When you have 11 foreigners in a team, this is not good for the development of football. The EU says that nationality quotas are not possible because of free circulation of workers, but in football, principles are different. You cannot consider a footballer like any normal worker because you need 11 to play a match. And they are more artists than workers. Apparently, Sepp Blatter never wants artists to leave their place of birth. That's tough. UEFA president at the time, Lennart Johansson, strongly felt that this decision would spell, quote, nothing short of disaster, and that it was made by people that were, quote, trying to destroy football. So for mainly those reasons, UEFA was initially extremely hostile towards the EU and their interventions on their dealings. They felt that certain laws just shouldn't apply to neither them nor football. But eventually, once they realized that it was in their best interest to cooperate with the ultimate lawmakers of the region and the people that could make or break them as an organization, it seems that they were more willing to cooperate in the long term. This mindset has allowed UEFA to negotiate their massive TV deals and media rights packages, organize huge multinational tournaments, and grow beyond their wildest dreams without major EU interference. I think UEFA and the EU are organizations that could be said to have similar objectives. Here at UEFA, our main objective is to preserve competition in football. If the competition is not perceived as fair, then we lose our stakeholders and we lose our legitimacy. The EU also aims to provide equal opportunities and fair competition. In that case, economic competition for companies and consumers. A quote by an anonymous UEFA official back in 2007. Now that we have a bit of context regarding where UEFA have come from, we come to the part that we're all familiar with, their unrivaled success. As I mentioned earlier on, UEFA organizes a large handful of showcase events. Of course, we have the Euro, which is always a must-see and has unbelievable potential for incredible stories. But their crown jewel is none other than the UEFA Champions League. As of 2024-25, 36 teams will participate and 189 matches will be played. Last season's final was reportedly watched by 450 million people live around the world. By comparison, the 2024 Super Bowl is said to have amassed roughly 160 million views worldwide. UEFA shares its projected revenue and distributions to all its member associations months prior to the following football season. Here it is on screen. In 2024-25, excluding what comes from the European Championship, UEFA projected that its revenue is set to cross 4.4 billion euros, and the Champions League is projected to encompass 2.5 billion of that, with the rest being made up from the Europa League and the Conference League. These are big sums we're talking about, and a large part of the success is owed to former UEFA president Lennart Johansson. We spoke about him briefly earlier on. He came into office in 1990. Johansson, together with the UEFA general Gerhard Einer, led UEFA into an era of greatness by harnessing what some refer to as the Golden Triangle: football, sponsorship, and television. In 1992, the European Cup was rebranded as the Champions League, an organization that once only collected revenue through gate receipts and inconsequential sponsorships was now taking full advantage of all of what I've just spoken about. And as a result, everyone that participated was able to reap the rewards too. Some say the Champions League is bigger than the World Cup. To the dismay of Sepp Blatter, it definitely crosses geographical boundaries in a way that I don't think many people expected. Real Madrid, a Spanish club, had one Spaniard in their starting lineup in their most recent win. Manchester City, an English football club, had only 2 Englishmen in their starting lineup when they won. They are also owned by Emirati royalty. I could go on and on. You want to play in the Champions League. If you can't because of your bad hip, I can relate more than you know, then you want to watch it. You want to read about the biggest players, about the biggest stories. You want to watch interviews, buy merchandise, travel to stadiums, throw profanities at rival fans on Reddit, get pissed in a bar and lose all your friends while you stumble alone in the streets of a city you're unfamiliar with, happy that at the very least no one you know is around to watch you in what's likely your most shameful hour. I mean, you want to eat crisps with Thierry Henry and David Beckham. All of that, minus 1 or 2 points, is what UEFA is selling, and we are buying all the time, every time, happily. Today's UCL is the pinnacle of football. It's something worth protecting, and it also explains why a lot of people have seen potential for opportunity. At the start of this section, I spoke about how all of this success is unrivaled. It is, but that's not for lack of trying. Of course, I'm talking about the everlasting threats of breakaway leagues. This is a video about football governance and the UEFAs and the FIFAs of the world. So, naturally, a question that may come to your mind is, what power do those being governed have? It comes up a heck of a lot. I showed this figure earlier on, which is an adaptation of a similar figure from the Borja Garcia paper I mentioned. But as he goes on to state later in this paper, the triangles evolved over time. FIFPro is there to assist in player grievances and give them a voice, and the European Clubs Association is there for the clubs. To add a bit of context, in 1998, a group was formed called the G14. This was a group of 14 of the biggest clubs in Europe's biggest leagues. The group's purpose was quite simple: provide a unified voice for the clubs in discussions with the governing bodies of football, UEFA, and FIFA. But what it actually ended up being was an elitist group of the big boys looking after only the interests of the big boys. This was later disbanded, and the European Clubs Association was established in 2008 and put in place. As things stand, there are 512 members. For the most part, what many of these discussions boil down to is requests for more benefits from UEFA, more lax rules, more leniency in playing schedules, or more money. For one reason or another. Reform. As history has shown many times, if that doesn't happen, we get a Super League. FIFA doesn't have this problem. I mean, who else is going to organize a World Cup? Who has the influence to bring together all of the confederations, countries, and resources to create a large tournament that all the biggest players in the world will join and embrace? To create a tournament better than one with a century of built-in prestige? Nobody. For better or for worse, we are stuck with FIFA.
Today I feel
a monopoly. But UEFA isn't exactly like that. Remember the story I told earlier on about the rebranding of the European Cup in 1992? Well, in truth, this only happened due to UEFA kind of being strong-armed by, among others, a disgruntled owner of probably the biggest club on the planet, billionaire TV magnate and soon-to-be Prime Minister of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi of AC Milan. Now, at the time, the European Cup was a straight knockout tournament from day one. Winners of the domestic leagues were drawn against one another, and straight from game one, if it was your time to go, you were gone. Imagine a world where champions of Italy, a Diego Maradona-led Napoli, and champions of Spain, an Emilio Butragueño-led Real Madrid were not only given 2 games to progress, but were drawn against each other in the first round. In 1987, that's the exact scenario that made Berlusconi decide to speak to investors, planners, and various other parties while investigating a new league with a new format, one that guaranteed not only several games but money and coverage for every qualified team. UEFA realized change was more profitable, and after a few short years, group stages and pots were introduced, and the competition has been expanding ever since. A Super League is nothing new. In 1998, all the usual suspects, Milan, United, Liverpool, Real Madrid, were implicated in a breakaway attempt codenamed Project Gandalf. I'm not joking. Entry was based on part merit and part status, and as per the Telegraph, the participating clubs would share a $3.2 billion pot over 3 seasons. However, apart from this official document from the Publications Office of the EU, this project lacked in conviction, probably due to the threats of sanctions to involve clubs by FIFA and UEFA. UEFA labeled the breakaway clubs as a cartel, and within 3 months, the project had vanished off the face of the earth. In 2003, the G14 looked to put together the European Golden Cup, a 2-league format that would include relegation and promotion. Again, no real conviction other than a group of Spanish media magnate businessmen who were floating the idea, although the G14 on several occasions publicly stated that they were not entertaining the idea. Which brings us to 2021, a new initiative, led by, among others, a disgruntled leader of probably the biggest club on the planet at the time, billionaire construction magnate and former politician Florentino Perez of Real Madrid. The usual suspects felt as though they were owed more money than the rest of the competition due to the fact that they attracted more eyeballs, or something like that. The claim was that people only really watch football for the showcase matches. By creating a closed league, we get that more often. Florentino Perez was trying to save football. 4 billion euros in funding was reported to be pledged by JP Morgan for a competition that included no relegation, guaranteed fortunes for the clubs in the system, and the promise of very many benefits. For many reasons, culturally this would not fly in European football. The stakes of relegation are what keep the sport exciting and fair. No team should ever be entitled to a certain reward or earning potential without continuous merit, and more than anything, despite the huge sums in the game, football is still seen as a working-class sport in most of Europe. A league born purely on the basis of revenue, it wouldn't really fly. The backlash was deafening. Fans across the world took to social media, to the streets, anywhere that they could let themselves be heard. Clubs that weren't involved were voicing their disappointment. Leeds referred to Liverpool as the Merseyside Reds, which is very funny. UEFA, along with all the major federations and football associations, banded together to condemn this project, claiming that any clubs or players that participated in this breakaway league would be banned from participation in their domestic and continental leagues. FIFA joined in a few days later, claiming that any clubs or players involved in the league wouldn't be eligible to represent their countries in any FIFA or UEFA organized event. Boris Johnson, former British Prime Minister, vowed to do everything he could to make sure the league doesn't go through. Emmanuel Macron, French president and #1 Kylian Mbappe fan said France will join FIFA and UEFA in preventing this breakaway. There is no scope for the few to distort the universal and diverse nature of European football. The European way of life is not compatible with European football being reserved for the rich and powerful. Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Tinashe. That right there tells you all you really need to know. However, if you're sitting there thinking,
was all this legal?
The European Court of Justice thought not. Since these sanctions were announced, questions over whether they are a violation of the European Union's anti-competitive laws arose. The ECJ came right out and confirmed that that was the case, declaring that rules prohibiting clubs and players from playing in those competitions are unlawful. On one hand, this was big. It doesn't mean that we're getting a Super League anytime soon, but it does mean that one can exist, and UEFA should be scared. But from where I'm sitting, on the other hand, this means nothing. The flurry of backlash and pushback from the fans, the clubs and the football associations, and the governmental intervention shows that UEFA is in a very strong position. A Super League will never fly. We got what we wanted, guys. It's a good thing, right? The years of cooperation and mutual respect with the EU and all other parties have not gone unnoticed. And on a final note, onto the section that many people who clicked onto this video were probably waiting for. Now, I want to go on record and say I left this section for last on purpose, because UEFA have displayed good governance for the most part, especially when you compare them to others in similar positions. However, there still remained dark patches and space for bad actors. It shouldn't surprise anybody that when we're talking about an organization this large, the number of accusations of corruption thrown at high-ranking officials, accusations of money laundering and cronyism, it's extensive. But I'm only going to focus on two high-ranking ones. In the mid-2010s, FIFA was subject to one of the largest corruption cases in the history of football. I'm not going to go into detail about it in this video, but the gist of it was that high-ranking FIFA officials had been alleged to have long been taking bribes, committing fraud, and participating in money laundering pertaining to the awarding of the FIFA World Cup. Sepp Blatter, FIFA president from 1998 to 2015, was at the center of it all. Three-time Ballon d'Or winner Michel Platini was once a FIFA employee on a consultant level from about 1998 to 2002. In 2006, he became the president of UEFA and was on track to succeed Sepp Blatter as the top dog in world football. That was until he received 2 million Swiss francs from FIFA in 2011 for no apparent reason, within the timeline of a fraud investigation, mind you. This completely derailed any plans of his for a FIFA presidency, as he was subsequently banned from all football activity for 6 years by FIFA's ethics committee. As of 2022, they've both been acquitted of fraud, as it was believed that this was part of an agreed amount stemming from his time while working at FIFA in the late 90s. So no wrongdoing was proven here. However, the world of football was not convinced of their innocence. And as high-ranking officials, that kind of reputation, it doesn't go away. Believe me, going from being a legend of world soccer to a devil is very difficult, especially when it comes to you in a totally unfair way. In this case, there are culprits who did not appear during this trial. Let them count on me. We will meet again, because I will not give up and I will go all the way in my quest for truth. Platini believes that this whole debacle was part of a wider attempt to prevent him from becoming FIFA president. Regardless of who is innocent or who is not, the amount of smoke and hearsay is a little unsettling from the perspective of a commoner. It was becoming more cronyistic, and that was one of the reasons I left. It was going in the wrong direction. Alex Phillips, a former head of governance and compliance who left UEFA quite early into Alexander Keferin's reign, had this to say. Alexander Keferin, current president of UEFA, followed on from Platini. Now, his accusations are a lot more tame, but to some, they've come with very devastating repercussions. He's been accused of drafting his unqualified best friends into positions of authority, something that many say directly led to maybe the biggest blip in his entire presidency to date. The 2022 Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid was hosted at the Stade de France in Saint-Denis. Thousands of fans were held in packed queues for hours before the game, causing dangerous crowds and levels of congestion. It was believed for one reason or another that over 30,000 fans were carrying fake tickets. Entry was denied to those fans, causing even further chaos. Fans were fired on with tear gas by police before the match, and the match was delayed by nearly 40 minutes. And after and before the game, dozens of fans were robbed leaving the stadium by local residents within the chaos. Of course, this occurred before a Champions League final, so there were a lot of eyeballs on this situation, and it wasn't the best to follow on from. Now, the most plausible version of what actually happened was that there were reports of fake tickets being sold on unofficial platforms prior to the final itself, particularly in the UK. So UEFA was on high alert and ready to scrutinize every ticket at the gates. As per the New York Times, there were only really about 2,500 fraudulent ticket holders in the crowd of tens of thousands. Andrew Robertson, the Liverpool left back that started that game, claimed that a friend of his, who he personally allocated a ticket to, was denied entry on the basis of it being fake.
Somebody told one of my mates that he's got a fake ticket, which I can assure definitely wasn't, because it was, obviously through me. So
it was a failure in planning, access arrangements, ticketing distribution, contingency planning, and depending on who you ask, potentially some innate discrimination on the part of stewards, security, and all those involved with the planning of the event. UEFA eventually accepted that they were responsible for this disaster, but only after they, along with the French police, had blamed Liverpool and their support for causing everything in the first place. A pretty distasteful attempt to shift the blame that everyone saw right through. Like with everything, many have looked towards the top of the ladder for answers, and they fixated themselves on Chipako, UEFA's head of safety and security that took over only a year before the final, reportedly a close friend of Catherine for over a decade. Internally, questions have been asked about the running of UEFA and how merit factors into the decision-making. Of course, these are all simply accusations, and the hiring practices and more of the organization are purely subject to speculation. But it's a talking point, that's all I'm trying to say. The overall point here is that despite UEFA being in charge of so many events that we all love, and the fact that they've put them together very well, every now and then they are subject to controversy. As I said about 30 minutes ago, UEFA is an interesting case study. They are at the center of the most beloved and followed sport on the planet. They've been able to organize and guide a well-oiled machine that produces talent, entertainment, and money in a seemingly unlimited fashion. They aren't universally loved, no governing body is, regardless of sport, culture, or practice. Some will always feel as though they've been screwed over in one way or another, but they get results and have had to sweat to get to this point. One thing I know is that whatever side of the fence you're sitting on, these guys are definitely not going anywhere. And there we have it. A deep dive on not a player, not a team, but a whole governing body. Maybe we'll look into CONMEBOL next. That should be fun. That's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.